Everyone is overlooking Braxton Jones in the Chicago Bears left tackle battle to the point where he's become underrated and taken for granted.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and redeem our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. On the show today, I want to take a closer look at Braxton Jones and maybe take a step back and look at his career a little bit more broadly, to the point where I think we're overlooking how good, not great, good he is for the Chicago Bears, and the grass is not always greener on the other side. And the whole situation with him reminds me a lot of the last left tackle debate we had for the Chicago Bears with Charles Leno. And I think those two players have more similarities than you might think. And I want to kind of compare their trajectories, where it was the same kind of thing of, you want better, but you know that you can also do a lot worse. And I also want to look and see if there's other players on this Bears roster that may fall in that category that we either overlook or take for granted, or realize, hey, maybe we had it better with that player than we thought we would in trying to replace and upgrade them, because that's kind of the key here, right? I don't think a lot of Chicago Bears fans think Braxton Jones is some terrible left tackle who they desperately need to upgrade from. There's a varying range of opinions, somewhere between he's really good and he's average and mediocre. But no one, I don't think you find too many reasonable Bears fans that think he's trash and, the worst left tackle in football, right? He's somewhere in the middle. And I also think you're not going to find a Chicago Bears fan who thinks Braxton Jones is this Pro Bowl stud who should never be replaced and upgraded because he's so good, just hand him all the money. Right? Everyone's somewhere in the middle of that range between excellent and terrible on Braxton Jones. And I think that's important to point out here, because sometimes we can have the pursuit of perfection, get in the way of something that's good enough. And I think there's a difference here between needing to upgrade from someone who is actually bad and a negative on your offense versus just wanting better at a position. And of course, you should want to upgrade the left tackle position. You should always want to upgrade the left tackle position. Even if you have a pretty good left tackle, you always want to go even better. You want the best possible left tackle. So I don't think anyone should, I'm not begrudging anyone for wanting to upgrade from Braxton Jones. The Bears should want to upgrade from Braxton Jones. But I think the point I want to stick on here is that you do need to make sure that if you're moving on from Braxton Jones, that your replacement is actually an upgrade and not just different, right? You don't want to replace him, or really any player, just for the sake of, well, let's get someone new in there and see if they can be better, because that's where you run into trouble with a roster building standpoint, right? Moving on from someone for the sake of moving on from them, as opposed to truly having a better alternative in place, is the key difference here. And that could very well be the case with second-round pick Ozzie Trapillo this year, or even the long-term development of Karana Magaji, the third-round pick last year. Either of those players could develop into a better player than Braxton Jones. But I don't think today, in early July, if everyone was healthy, clearly Braxton Jones would be the best of the three left tackles. Now, maybe between now and week one, as Braxton Jones is slow to recover from injury and Trapillo stays in there and it keeps working, right? You could start to build a pathway towards right then Trapillo potentially being the better left tackle even by week 1. And Braxton Jones' injury is kind of the ultimate wild card factor in all of this. But it feels to me a little bit like we're almost automatically assuming that this rookie second round pick is going to step in and instantly be a better left tackle and an upgrade over Braxton Jones, when he should be an upgrade at some point. You drafted him in the second round thinking he will, over the course of his rookie contract, become a better left tackle. But he might not be a better left tackle right now, and he might not be a better left tackle this season. But I do think before you move on from Braxton Jones, you do need to have a certain amount of confidence and have like seen him be the better left tackle to show you that he is capable of being the better left tackle, instead of just assuming he will develop and grow into a better left tackle. But you actually want to like be sure that that's actually happening before you move on from a left tackle in Braxton Jones, who's actually at least pretty good, right? I'm not here to like power rank NFL left tackles. Like Braxton Jones is not certainly not a top 5 left tackle, probably not a top 10 left tackle. But again, I'm not going through and looking at every team's left tackle, but like he's a top 15 left tackle, certainly. You know, you look around the NFL, can you name 15 better left tackles than Braxton Jones? Probably not. Like he's a solid player, like not just average starter, but I think the fairest spot to put him is like above average starting left tackle. Like Braxton Jones has never made a Pro Bowl. He might not ever make a Pro Bowl. He has flaws. He has limitations. He has a ceiling. Like, yeah, he's far from perfect, and there's going to be mistakes and plays that you want better from Braxton Jones. And certainly, if there are 10 to 15 better left tackles in the NFL, then that means there's plenty of room to upgrade and do better than Braxton Jones. But also, there's also plenty of room then to go the wrong direction and have a left tackle worse than Braxton Jones. And you draft Ozzie Trapillo thinking he will be better, but as we know, not every draft pick turns out to be as good as you thought they would. And that's not me doubting Ozzie Trapillo. That's just the statistics of the NFL draft. There's no sure thing that Ozzie Trapillo or Karan Amagaji will truly be better than Braxton Jones. And it's sort of like a devil you know versus devil you don't thing. And the real challenge here becomes, well, Braxton Jones is entering the last year of his rookie contract. He's going to want a contract extension. The going rate for a starting left tackle is not cheap these days, especially some of the big contracts that were handed out to not great players on the free agent market. Like Dan Moore goes to the Tennessee Titans on, was it a 4-year, $82 million contract? And I'm not sure Dan Moore is really that much better than Braxton Jones, if at all better than Braxton Jones. And so if Braxton Jones is looking at, $20 million a year potentially on another contract, that factors in quite a bit, right? It's not just, hey, Bears keep the best left tackle, but would you rather have maybe Braxton Jones at $20 million or Ozzie Trapillo on a rookie contract, and maybe even Jones is a little bit better, but not $20 million a year better? So then do you go with the cheaper player who's younger and you think can eventually get him? Like, that's kind of the danger you get here of like, well, like if Braxton Jones still had a couple of years left on his rookie contract, there wouldn't be any question about keeping him around, right? The only reason you talk about moving on from Braxton Jones is because he's going to cost too much and maybe not be worth that big contract when you potentially have a cheaper quality alternative on the roster via the draft and Ozzie Trapillo. And so that's what makes it difficult for me. And yet offensive line is so important that you better make sure you know that if you're letting Braxton Jones walk this offseason, that your alternative plan of Trapillo and Karan Amagaji presumably is for sure going to be fine. Because it brings me back to the last left tackle the Bears move on from, Charles Leno Jr. And I think the more I sat and thought about this, the more similarities there were between Braxton Jones and Charles Leno as players and as their role on the Bears offensive line. So I want to put those two guys head to head. They were different stages of their career, but there's a lot of through lines between the two of them that I think are demonstrating kind of what this dynamic is right now for the Bears and for this offensive line. We'll break down next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Gametime, the best way to get tickets for all of your favorite live events. I have the Gametime app on my phone, and I use it all the time. I just went and just got concert tickets with Gametime. I've been to Bears games, been to baseball games, been to a bunch of shows this summer. It's been a great summer concert season, and I've been able to get my tickets on Gametime because it's the best ticket buying experience. They make it fast and simple. You get the best last-minute tickets on deals, and prices actually drop the closer you get to the start of the event. And so when you can see your view from your seat, you can get a great price with a low price guarantee. It takes all the worry out of the ticket buying experience. I've only had great experiences buying through Gametime. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with the Gametime app. Download Gametime, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem our code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. There's a lot more similarities to Braxton Jones and Charles Leno than I initially thought. Like at first I was just thinking about them as like, kind of late round picks who were thrust into the starting lineup early on, and that's, a rarity in the NFL to be able to get a 5th round pick in Braxton Jones, or even more rare, a 7th round pick in Charles Leno, who takes over as your starting left tackle. Not just like, oh no, we had an injury, so he has to fill in for a couple games, but like, no, he is our every week plan A starting left tackle. That is extremely rare. And like Charles Leno, undoubtedly, for whatever you think about Charles Leno as a player, is a great draft pick, a home run draft pick. Over at ESPN, Ben Solak was just going through the best draft picks of all time in every slot, and I believe he had Charles Leno as the best player ever taken with the 246th overall pick. Like, it's crazy. There's only like a couple other players from that 7th round that ever amounted to anything that year. He was a great home run draft pick for a 7th round pick. Now, that being said, he was a average to above average left tackle for his entire career. But the Bears had him for 7 seasons, and he really didn't miss a game throughout that process. And that's one of the big differences, I'd say, between him and Braxton Jones, is Charles Leno was, I should say, a absolute Iron Man on the offensive line, whereas one of the contributing factors for Braxton Jones is he missed 5 games this past season and 6 games the year before. Like, injuries have been a little bit more of a bigger factor for him than for Braxton Jones, than for Charles Leno. But like, when you think about the Bears being at this inflection point, for Charles Leno, it was a little bit later in his career. The Bears gave him a contract extension at the end of his rookie contract, and they were getting to the end of that contract extension and trying to decide, well, do we keep rolling with Braxton Jones, or do we try and upgrade the left tackle position? With Charles Leno. I'm gonna mix their names up throughout this podcast, I bet. But do we keep rolling with Charles Leno, or do we try and get an upgrade? Like, he's been good, and we gave him the contract extension, but maybe we just want a little better. And so do you move on? I remember this same kind of debate about Charles Leno at that time, albeit later in his career, not as much of a potential development still in front of him. At that time, Charles Leno was 29, so he was not over the hill yet, but getting there. But that's a slightly different factor in here. But like, it was the same caliber of left tackle and same conversation about, yes, you can do a lot worse, but couldn't you also do better by being able to upgrade that guy? But it goes a little bit deeper than that even. When you look at how those two players went about their careers, late round picks, albeit different rounds, thrown into the starting lineup very early in their career. Braxton Jones is a rookie. Charles Leno started a little bit as a rookie and then took over full-time in year 2. Both players I think of as, better, more finesse pass blockers and not as enforcing in the running game. Not moving people the way that maybe you would like them to. And that was always sort of maybe a slight lingering frustration with both players. They move really well. They're athletic, but not like strong, dominant, physical run blockers. They both also have had some extended penalty issues. Charles Leno had a bunch early in his Bears career and slowly kind of got better at it. And Braxton Jones has been the same way. Just little stuff, false starts and holdings and little things that you kind of are waiting for this player to get over, and they never really quite did over the course of their career. And they both fell in this category of, like, I think good, but not great. It's worth noting Charles Leno did make the Pro Bowl in 2018, I believe. that was kind of one of those, like, he was an alternate and a couple of left tackles ahead of him backed out, and so he kind of snuck in as like the 5th or 6th choice, but it still counts as a Pro Bowl on his resume, and I'm not going to take that away from him. He was a one-time Pro Bowler, but I don't think we think of Charles Leno as like a Pro Bowl caliber left tackle consistently over the course of his career. But he had better seasons and worse seasons. 18 maybe was maybe his best season all around. So like you kind of see them in that same category, where I think if you put Braxton Jones on that 2018 Bears team, or that kind of team, he could maybe sneak into a Pro Bowl as like a 5th or 6th alternate. Like that's the kind of caliber player he is. Like both these guys are in that same spot. And so then I think back to, well, what happened when the Bears did move on from Charles Leno? Do you remember how they moved on from Charles Leno? Because it was sort of rumored for a while in that 2021 offseason that they were potentially going to move on. They go into the NFL draft, and lo and behold, what a concept, they use a 2nd-round pick on a left tackle. And so after using a 2nd-round pick on a left tackle, at that time, it was Tevin Jenkins coming out of Oklahoma State, but they initially drafted him with the plan of playing Tevin Jenkins at left tackle. We kind of forget that with history and how everything has played out since then. But Tevin Jenkins was drafted to start at left tackle, so they released Charles Leno after the draft, and he ends up going to the Commanders on a 1-year deal. Actually, they were the Washington football team at the time, but the Bears drafted this 2nd-round replacement, moved on from Charles Leno, said, sorry, we're going on to the young kid. And at the time, kind of feels like the Trapillo situation. It's like, great, 2nd-round pick, this guy's a better run blocker, he's got more size, he's physical, he's got some versatility. Like, we were really excited about what Tevin Jenkins brought. It's a 1st-round caliber guy we felt like the Bears got in the 2nd round there. And maybe Trapillo wasn't that part, but we still really like Ozzie Trapillo and think he can develop into a fine starting caliber player for the Bears. But they moved on from Charles Leno, handed the keys over to Tevin Jenkins, and what happened? Tevin Jenkins was injured. Got injured during the preseason or training camp and started that season on injured reserve. And so their replacement plan for Charles Leno was now on injured reserve, so they had to bump over Elijah Wilkinson was their starting left tackle in that 2021 season to start the year for the first, like, I don't know how many games did he end up rolling with that year, but then off the street, they signed a 40-year-old Jason Peters. Remember that he was like fishing or something, and they called him on the fishing boat and had him come out and try and get into game shape. And so they were rolling with a 40-year-old starting left tackle, and that was making Mitch Trubisky's job more difficult. And as the team as a whole was kind of struggling a little bit, like they weren't imploding, but you remember that last Matt Nagy season, they go 6-11. They started out okay, and then kind of went on a couple of losing streaks in there, and it just never really came together. And that wasn't purely because of the left tackle situation. I mean, they had some messes elsewhere on the roster to try and clean up and attend to. And of course, offensive coordinator Bill Lazor, and at that point it was Justin Fields, and then Fields was hurt, and Andy Dalton was kind of going back and forth. Like, there was a lot of messy things around that team, but the left tackle situation didn't help. And in that season, you were sure kind of feeling like, man, Charles Leno wasn't great, but at least you knew exactly what you were getting for all 17 games. He didn't miss games throughout his career, and it turned out like, I mean, in the long run, yes, they needed to move on from Charles Leno, that the plan was always to replace him with a young player. Like, that's a smart thing, is to get younger and develop players for the future. But Charles Leno's replacement ended up actually being Braxton Jones in the draft the following year. They take Jones in the 5th round. Jones ends up starting, and that's how we get to where we are today, where it's like, I don't think since the Bears let Charles Leno go, has the left tackle play been any better than it was when Charles Leno was here. Like, if Braxton Jones is about that level, and certainly it was worse with Elijah Wilkinson, like, the Bears left tackle play has only been equal to or worse than Charles Leno's play since they moved on from Charles Leno, trying to upgrade from Charles Leno. Like, it's hard to upgrade from players who are decent. It's easier to upgrade from bad players, right? Of course, the Bears need to upgrade from Coleman Shelton at center, right? Of course, yeah, that's a player who's not very good, and you need someone better, versus Braxton Jones and Charles Leno are players who are good, but you also want better. And so I'm not here to say the Bears shouldn't be trying to move on from Braxton Jones. The point is being like, hey, let's just make sure we're not taking it for granted and making sure that the plan for moving on from him is clearly an upgrade and not just we're pretty sure this should work out, because you can always end up worse, right? You can always end up with Elijah Wilkinson and Jason Peters trying to play left tackle because you moved on from your guy. maybe a little quicker than you should have. At least Braxton Jones will be around for this season, and you can have a better sense of how that crossover is going to happen and see what Trippier looks like before you have to actually force him in there. So hopefully some lessons learned from the Charles Leno situation. And it made me wonder, like, are there other players either on the roster right now that we should be weary of moving on from in the same way, or other players they've gotten rid of more recently that maybe we did take for granted or overlook a little bit? I want to run through a quick handful of other guys who might fall into a similar kind of category of, like, they're not bad, so you don't have to upgrade from them, but you'd like to upgrade from them, but you better make sure you have a good upgrade plan if you do. That's next on Locked On Bears. I think Charles Leno and Braxton Jones represent a very specific sweet spot in terms of, like, players who toe that line between purgatory, right? This, like, good enough but not great thing where it's like, yeah, you don't want to do worse, but you do want to do better, but you don't want to risk, like, I don't know if there's another player who fits perfectly into that category, but I think there's a couple of guys who I think are in this mold of, like, hey, we might be eager to move on from them, and maybe we're too eager to move on from them because they're still good players. It's not like it's a big bad hole that you just absolutely need to upgrade, but it's like, but you would like to do better if you have the opportunity to, and maybe we should just make sure we're being clear and intentional about making sure that it is an upgrade and not just a replacement for the sake of replacing them. Like, I think we're experiencing this a little bit right now with DeMarcus Walker. He was a salary cap casualty before the start of free agency. And yes, I mean, he was not a cheap contract. The Bears saved some salary cap space. And I'm not here to say, like, the Bears made a big mistake by cutting DeMarcus Walker. But I do think, like we talked about on yesterday's podcast, there's still this big hole on the defensive end depth chart behind Montez Sweat and Dayo Odeyingbo. And I can't help but feel like DeMarcus Walker, at his salary number, as a number 3 pass rusher who can kick in the inside in Dennis Allen's defense, like, it feels like that might be kind of nice to have, right? Not that not having him is going to derail the whole Bears season or anything, but, like, maybe a little too eager to move on from DeMarcus Walker without having a really good alternative plan there. Like, if Dayo Odeyingbo is getting $16 million a year, I'll give DeMarcus Walker 7.5, right? Like, I can live with that. I realize, like, that's a big chunk of cap space and you need space to make other moves. And it's a little bit oversimplified to just say, oh, you should have kept him, because if they had kept him, they might not have been able to do other things in the order that they did. But nonetheless, I'm still left feeling like, man, maybe we're gonna feel like we took DeMarcus Walker for granted if the Bears don't get a better number 3 edge rusher for them in the mix there. But some other players for the future that might fall into a similar category here. I feel like I've been the DeAndre Swift defender recently on this podcast, despite not really being that big of a fan of DeAndre Swift. But, like, that's another one too, where it's like, yes, we kind of wanted to get rid of DeAndre Swift this offseason, and unless he has a really good year this year, we're going to want to get rid of DeAndre Swift next offseason. But you should make sure that you actually have a better running back than DeAndre Swift, because much like Charles Leno and Braxton Jones, Swift is not a bad running back. He might not be an $8 million a year running back the way his contract suggests, but he's had, over the last 2 seasons combined, he's had 2,000 yards rushing. Like, that's not every running back can come into a team and rush for 960 yards this year and 1,050 yards the year before. And then not to mention his receiving output of almost 400 yards through the air this year. Like, DeAndre Swift is not a great running back, but he is not a bad running back either. And I totally want to have a better running back than DeAndre Swift, but I don't want to just cut or trade DeAndre Swift and say, all right, now let's find a replacement. And we can't. Now we roll with Roshan Johnson, Kyle Monangai, and some other rotational free agent in a competition, looking to hope that one of those running backs becomes as good as DeAndre Swift was. Like, you know what I mean? That's a position where we do want to get better, but you could also go backwards if you don't properly replace them. And like it's different than replacing a bad player. It's like, no, we want to take a good player and put a great player in that spot. Sometimes it's harder to find the great players to put in that spot, especially if there's financial restraints or draft picks. Are you going to force yourself to reach early for a running back? Or are you going to hand out a big contract to another running back in free agency? Like, it's not easy to just find an instant automatic upgrade over DeAndre Swift without trying to make a competition there that might not end up being as good as DeAndre Swift was. Even that DeAndre Swift is not that great, it's still sort of, again, a devil you know versus the devil you don't there. I think this category applies a little bit to even Tremaine Edmonds at linebacker. Again, on his current contract, overpaid and has not played up to the contract the Bears gave him. I think the same is true for DeAndre Swift. I think it's even more true for Tremaine Edmonds. His 4-year, $72 million contract makes him the third highest paid linebacker in the NFL, and he has been far from the third best linebacker in the NFL. He's been very underwhelming, but that doesn't mean he's been a bad player, right? He's not hurting the Bears defense by being out there. He just hasn't been worth the massive contract they gave him. And so I can easily see a situation where after the season, they cut Tremaine Edmonds and save a bunch of salary cap money, but like, you're going to be hard pressed to get a player who's clearly better than Tremaine Edmonds. And it might be worthwhile for your team to say, hey, we'll take a lesser player and the cap space that's more valuable to the team as a whole. But you can also envision a future where that replacement linebacker isn't as good, and you're looking around going, man, kind of wish we still had Tremaine Edmonds. You know, for all his underwhelming aspects, he was still reliable and good and fast and big and strong and made plays. Like, he's a good football player. He's not bad. He's just not elite. And of course we should want elite, but it's hard to find elite. And if you don't have elite, if your plan B is Ruben Hippolyte and TJ Edwards, like that, you might end up regarding that one a little bit and feeling, man, maybe we took that for granted and overlooked it in some of the same ways we just talked about with Charles Leno. The last name I'll throw in here maybe isn't perfect comparison, but Cole Kmet. I mean, once we see Colston Loveland, and once we see that he's good, then Cole Kmet becomes expendable. I think this more applies to the people that have been trying to trade Cole Kmet since draft day. It's like, yeah, Colston Loveland needs to be better than Cole Kmet. You drafted Colston Loveland with the 10th overall pick because you think and are sure he will be better than Cole Kmet. But I wouldn't trade away Cole Kmet until you know for sure Colston Loveland is better than him. We've seen plenty of tight ends in the NFL draft that don't turn out to be as good as you thought they would be, even as that early of a draft pick. There have been plenty of tight end draft busts that the Lions and Eric Ebron jumped to mind right away that didn't work out as a top 10 pick. And so while you've got Cole Kmet already here, already signed, already on the books, there's no rush to move on from him until you know that you've got a better option already here. Once Loveland breaks out and is great and is everything you want him to be and all that stuff, good to go. You know, that's totally fine. But in the meantime, we shouldn't be in a rush to get rid of Cole Kmet until we are certain his replacement is better. And the Bears are banking on that, and Ryan Poles and Ben Johnson will be in big trouble and be in a tough spot on the roster if that first round pick does not prove to be better than Cole Kmet. But let's at least get there and see it all come together first. That's kind of the big lesson of the podcast today. Let's not get too eager to move on from players that aren't bad. Even if they're not great, if they're not a bad player, we shouldn't be in a rush to get them out the door until you know you've got a better option secured, because we've been burned on that before with the likes of Charles Leno and others before him. So that's kind of the big lesson as we gear up for Braxton Jones returning to training camp practice at some point in recovery from his off-season surgery. When we get a Braxton Jones injury update, you can be sure we'll break it down for you right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're only 3 days a week this time of year in our slow season, but as we get closer to training camp, we're going to ramp back up to a full 5 days a week. So we're going to take Wednesday off. We'll be back for another Thursday podcast, which means we'll be back with another opportunity for you to bear down.